You're listening to The Venomous Fringe, Cryptids and Paranormal, with hosts Chris Fringe and Ryan Tremblay. Join them as they dive into the macabre of our world and dive into the madness and the mysteries that lie above it. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Fringeaholics, and all listeners alike. You're listening into The Venomous Fringe. I'm your host, Chris Fringe, joined alongside my co-host, Ryan Tremblay. Ryan, good evening. How are you?
I'm good. What's the crack, people?
You know, dude, it's interesting. It's like week 2 by me with all of this mumbo-jumbo going on, and I'm staying as positive as I could. I mean, personally, I'm not even concerned. I have my TP. I also have the people around me that make me happy, and we're all taking necessary action.
Yeah, we live in strange times, my friend.
Oh, yes, we do. We do. But you know what, though? I mean, time goes on, life goes on, and I can't complain. It's a very scary time for some, but for me, I'm just taking it as the days go on. I'm not too concerned because I'm just living my best life even throughout this whole ordeal. There's so much going on with me, whether, I'm out of university for this, or I'm going to get laid off because of this. There's always a big ways of going about it, but I mean, it's a cycle of life.
Well, then that's what you got to do.
Mm.
You got to stay normal.
Oh, yeah. But for fellow Fringeaholics out there, though, tonight listening in, I know that, of course, what we're talking about is the infamous coronavirus. Folks, I hope you all are staying safe. I hope you all are staying warm. I know a few of you guys have mentioned about the coronavirus as a whole, that as you've known people that have gotten it, or you've known somebody who has, or you yourself and your family has it. Folks, please take all the necessary precautions needed. We are in your prayers and thoughts, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, we are always here looking out for you, fellow Fringeaholics, listening into this show this evening. So please, guys, be safe, and with all by means, follow what we're saying, especially because it's just outrageous out there. I mean, let me be honest. I think we've ran out of there's so much hand sanitizer and TP off the shelves. It's unbelievable, dude. I don't know how it is by you, but by me, it's insane.
Oh, it's starting to get crazy out here. We're starting to see the effects even in this small town.
National Guard's been sighted in a town not too close by me because there was a small incident that happened over the last week, and it was a gathering, and it got a result of over almost 30 cases of the COVID-19. So
A wake call, isn't it?
it's a very scary thought to think about that, you have all this action going on, and it's not like you've asked for it. So I'm hoping for the best, dude. I really am.
That's all we can do. Just brace for impact and do the best we can and hope the best comes through. It's
Absolutely.
scary, but it's going to get better. It will get better eventually.
Mm-hmm. And for right now, too, though, I mean, what we're talking about subject matter tonight, we're talking Wendigo. Wendigo has been one of our longest requested topics to talk about, especially because of how we have talked about dogmen, we've talked about skinwalkers and Bigfoots, and how they all draw close parallels to the Wendigo creature, but not necessarily saying that that is the same creature, but there is the drawn similarity. And I think a lot of people, when we talk about Wendigo, too, it's a very fascinating topic. You're talking about something here that goes back to Native American culture. So for one, to sit down and talk about such creature is just a greatness of glorifying, because it is an interesting subject. I remember when I was, I think it was a teenager, I went to a library, pick up a book on Native American folklore, and down on the lore was about Wendigo. Now, this is, of course, a public library, and there's not many books, unless you're going down into the rabbit hole with a lot of the vintage and classified books that are of nonfiction, telling tales of skinwalkers and Wendigo. But when I was reading this book, looking up on the lore behind it, the Native American spirit itself, and other different variations of it, you really get your mind dug deep into a situation that just truly is just freaky when we are reading and looking up creatures like this. I mean, for me, it was terrifying. What about you, Ryan? Where did it all originate with Wendigo with you?
Interestingly enough, I actually was made aware of the Wendigo when I first read Stephen King's Pet Sematary.
Mm.
Yeah, the creature is loosely described in the novel, and it should have been touched upon in the movie, but yeah, it's in that movie, and it's in the novel, and it's in a couple of other novels from Stephen King as well. So that really caught my interest. I need to know what the Wendigo was, what it was all about, what it actually really represents. And just from there, it just took off, and I started researching more and more, and it's quite the interesting cryptid.
I find that to be very fascinating because even with pop culture, with how we've seen it, like I mean, like you said, Pet Cemetery, perceived as a fiction, as a fictitious book based on actual accountability of animals and of supernatural and paranormal like situations. You know, Wendigo, a brief, well, not even really mentioned in the film, as you said, but also a major character as a whole in the novel. And really, it's just something that fascinates me because when we look at Wendigo, I think the number one thing people think of is a skinwalker. But when we look at Wendigo, it's a little different. I think Wendigo, you know, is not as there's a different background behind what the Wendigo is. And tonight, I think it's appropriate we sit down, talk the origins of the Wendigo, as well as discuss some of the Wendigo encounters, what we believe the Wendigo is, and of course, overall, what this creature perceives in cryptozoology. But before we get started with that, folks, again, Fringeaholics, I want to thank you all again for tuning in to tonight's edition of the Venomous Fringe. If you guys would like to get in contact with us, you can reach us at thevenomousfringe@gmail.com. I'll leave a link down below in the description if you guys would like to get a hold of us. If you want to submit your cryptid encounter, if you guys would like to come on the show, or better yet, if you guys just want to send me an email of appreciation or just in general talk to me, you can reach me through that email. And of course, there are social media links we'll talk more about down below later on. But with all that being said, folks, if you want to reach us now at that email, feel free to reach us that now. All that being said, let's get into the Wendigo. So the Wendigo, Ryan, is the Native American, I think, one of the granddaddy of Native American legends, because it's one of the most well talked about in Native folklore. And as we talked about with Pet Cemetery, we talk about how it was a character in that book and how it impacts pop culture. You have a movie coming out with that title of Wendigo. But origin based, Ryan, where do we get the starting stone for Wendigo? Where does it come from?
That actually stems from various tribes, not only in America here, but in Canada. The Algonquin actually very much believe that the Wendigo is a real thing, a tangible thing, and they fear it more than anything. And with good cause. This thing is known to be cannibalism. You know, it's death, it's starvation, it's just fear embodied. You know, whenever those cold seasons came about, those fears just escalated, and I can see why. I can honestly see why. It's a terrifying cryptid that I would not want to run to ever.
I find when we look at Wendigo, we see different variations. We
Mm-hmm.
think of just how directive of the cannibalistic traits this thing has. And when you talk about how people believe it's to be a real thing in certain places, do we get often confused that perhaps maybe we're seeing Wendigo creatures responsible for certain actions, whether it's attacking livestock or it's doing something in the woods? There have been cases where people have found this trees knocked over, torn apart. We've seen carvings. Now, all that are true to Satanism, but at the same time, are we seeing activity of Wendigo-like creatures performing these type of methods and acts in the woods all throughout the U.S.? Could these be being misidentified for other cryptids?
It very well could be, because there is actually the same Wendigo name often applied to a type of Sasquatch up north. So everything we see that's, you know, a tree structure or footprints or, you know, like you said, livestock being killed or whatever, yeah, that could be the result of the Wendigo type Sasquatch. Now, something to note is the name the Wendigo is actually spelled differently when it's applied to a type of Sasquatch. It's not Wendigo, it's Wendigo, but it still means the same thing. It means cannibalistic spirit.
And that's a very strong term because of what it means and to be the cannibalistic spirit. That finds me to be even more fascinated and enticed with it because it just truly stands out a little bit more on the old fashioned blend with how this thing is of a spirit of Native American lore and how its actions can define what it does by doing the worst of what it could do. It could invade a village. It could kill somebody.
Oh,
Anything. It can do anything. I mean, even in modern times, it can chase a car, it can kill someone. Someone could be going for a walk, and a Wendigo can snatch somebody. These are just examples, but still, it's the whole principle.
Well, it had to have happened in the past. I mean, for these tribes to actually fear them as they have, it must have happened more times than we like to think.
Why is it that Native Americans would fear something that would be of their own origin in a way, especially with how this is a Native American spirit? Is it because of the fact that perhaps some have used it as a dark magic and for negative needs? Or is it because of the dark magic behind becoming one?
I think it's a little bit of both. And if you really stop and think about it, when you think of the Wendigo, you think of something that's unstoppable, that's always going to be hunting you at every turn because it has a hunger that just doesn't go away. So nobody is safe from that curse. Men, women, children, the elderly, anybody could be prey.
Do you think that with Wendigo and how it's seen, that this creature is very much so an apex in its spiritual lore, that it's even a more dominant creature than, let's just say, the devil?
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. This thing is just, when they think of the Wendigo, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to them. It's worse than the cold season. It's worse than starvation. This is an actual thing that's going to be stalking you at every turn that you just cannot get away from. So I think to a lot of these tribes, this is the embodiment of pure, unadulterated evil.
They say that the Wendigo is created whenever the human resorts to cannibalism to survive. Years past, the practice was possible, although rare. Many of the tribes and settlers and regions were cut off by the bitter snows and ice of North Woods. However, also, eating another person to survive was sometimes resorted to, and thus a origin basis of the Wendigo legend was created. How true can that be, Ryan?
If you look at the case of December 20th, 1879, the case of Swift Runner, Swift Runner was actually a Cree Native American, and he was accused of being a Wendigo. And if you look at his story, it's actually a really terrifying story.
What happened in that story exactly? Because it's now, just to go ahead and bring out a little bit of light, I am not very familiarized with this case because of the Wendigo tale. There are very much so various tales, but Ryan, what became of this case?
Well, Swift Runner actually one time claimed that he was dying of starvation, that he had to abandon his family due to starvation. But the funny thing is, he didn't look any leaner. Even the priests in the town were noticing he looked healthy, he looked strong. And then he started mentioning his reoccurring nightmares of being a Wendigo.
Hmm.
So they tried to actually interrogate him more about this, but he wouldn't cooperate until he was drunk, which is an interesting detail. But he did proclaim over and over again that it was the Wendigo that made him commit these crimes against his family. And they actually did find a crime scene with the bodies of his said family. The bones were cracked open, the marrow was sucked out, and there was a boiling pot of human fat over the fire.
Did they believe that he had went crazy and that this was all just a mental vision of psychiatric care?
Some did, while others did believe that he was indeed possessed by the Wendigo spirit.
I often find it interesting when there are some stories that go about where people are, they say that they are assigned, that they were told to kill somebody, that they were told to do this because the voices in my head said that they would do that. And then there have been some cases where people who have killed people but have also eaten people, they would go on to say that, well, the demon said I would do that. Would that be a case of Wendigo like activity, or would that just be something totally irrelevant and just that of a demonic possession?
It very well could be something that has to do with the whole Wendigo psychosis, because there is an actual clinical term for someone that is inflicted with the cannibalism and the psychotic behavior. They actually did create the Wendigo psychosis. Now, it could be a mental illness in some cases, but I think in some cases also it's legit. There is something going on there. We do get manipulated by spirits. It's not something a lot of people like to acknowledge, but manipulation is very strong for the human beings.
The fact that there is a cannibalistic, supernatural like creature of a spiritual realm that can be come to life like any creation, and to run around in a in the woods and easily eat people, whatever it chooses, is very materialistically violent and vivid, I think. I mean, how many, when we look at Gugway or Bigfoots, for example, we look at Gugway and we know that these creatures, they can operate in a pack or a tribe and they can operate and they are aggressive creatures. We talked about the face eaters at one point with them too. You know, you have a very violent occurrence where if they act as natural as they could be with that, the Wendigo is a cannibalistic spirit, one of which that would do a hell of a lot more damage. I mean, I'm not trying to compare and contrast, but I'm saying that Wendigos seem to be more of an aggressive like animal when we look at our groups. So let me ask you this though, Ryan. What about when we put in the group of the food chain? Do what do we see as? Would we classify the Wendigo as an apex predator of the spiritual sense, or would they be apex as a whole for cryptozoology, suppressed dogmen even?
I would say as a whole, when you really look at the abilities that the Wendigo has, it's really not going to have any worthy challengers. You know, you have the voice mimicry, you have the ability to play mind games with the intended prey, you know, to wear them down emotionally and mentally. You know, you really got the top notch apex right there because
There,
it knows what it's doing. It's setting out on a mission to break you down little by little until that moment comes where it can actually start feasting upon you.
what about the reports of the times of can one be easily killed? Like, has there been cases? I've read a few where they've apparently killed Wendigos.
I think those cases are very, very rare. And if somebody's going to set out to do something like that, they absolutely have to know what they are doing.
Are
This
you
is a case where there cannot be any mistakes.
are you familiarized with the case of the Cray Indian named Jack Fiddler?
Oh, a little bit. I'm vaguely familiar with that one. Do you want to cover that one?
Jack Fiddler reported to have killed 14 of the creatures Wendigos within his lifetime, and that
Oh,
his last murder was actually resulted in imprisonment, and he was 87 when he was tried for that. Reportedly, he had went out and he was responsible for killing 14 of these cannibalistic animals with a semi-automatic or a shotgun of not shotgun. At the time, it was a totally different time period. Excuse me, folks. I'm getting too sidetracked with that. With a shotgun, and you know he would be going out to shoot these things. Now, this all occurred within this. Now, this is a different time period, so this isn't like it was 1987 or 1990. He was tried like a regular in a native type judicial system of how they go about their own sentencing around this time. This was in 1907, folks. So you're looking at 100 or so years of a totally different time period. And this guy, from the duration of the early 1800s to 1907, was shooting these Wendigos, killing 14 of them. And when he was imprisoned with his son Joseph, they were tried for the murder by a Cray Indian woman. They both pleaded guilty to the crime but defended themselves, stating that the woman had been possessed by the spirit of a Wendigo and was on the verge of transforming into one entirely. According to the defense, that she had to be killed before she was murdered by other members of the tribe. This is a very interesting case because we look back at those stories, we think about, well, you know, what if this woman was in fact possessed, or maybe she wasn't possessed, or perhaps maybe Jack and his son were both possessed by Wendigos themselves, tasked to kill other ones for some other given purpose. You definitely go down the rabbit hole when we start talking like this, folks, but really, the story of Jack Fiddler is interesting because he knew Native American tribes that were losing people of their tribe by these Wendigo creatures. He was basically the Wendigo hunter.
hmm. Was he at all tied to shamanism in any way?
He doesn't necessarily go into too many details about his life. He doesn't mention anything necessarily that imply that he had any practices of magic. But what it does showcase was that he knew of the occurrences going on and that he had been in the woods all his life. And so it makes me wonder if maybe because of the spiritualism of this creature that he had some sort of magic bullet. I'm not trying to say silver, but perhaps maybe he had some sort of power of his own. It would make perfect sense if he had to have some sort of practice in shamanism because if he was to kill 14 Wendigos and perhaps even kill the 15th one upon this woman's murder, then I would have to think to myself that he had to have practiced some sort of magic in order for him to survive all 14 attempts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He would have to know a great deal about it.
Hmm.
Because in many tales I've read, the only way to actually kill a Wendigo is to cut out its heart and bury it in a silver box and bury the heart. But I've never heard of them dying with guns.
You hear about the artillery back then. I mean, in 1907, you have a regular revolver and a shotgun at best. And you also got to remember, too, that gunpowder is still a thing at this time. So people who are putting powder into the gun and into the coil and trying to ignite, and to, of course, pump it up and reload and to go ahead and shoot, you're dealing, it's a lot of time consistency in situations like that, especially if you have a giant 8-foot predator on bipedal running at you, trying to kill you. I have
Oh,
a
absolutely.
I have a small little theory to that story that perhaps maybe now this is just my 2 cents and my two personal beliefs on it. My first one is I believe that Jack Fiddler was in fact a Indian of a different specific tribe who had practiced shamanism, and that his tribe was attacked by Wendigos, and that he himself was out to go ahead and kill these Wendigo creatures because that was part of his system. It was a mission. He practiced this miracle, or at least he practiced this based on himself and everything, whatever in the shaman belief, and scented himself, saged himself, put all these protective spells on him to keep him safe from danger. And it would make perfect sense to be put in such a tight predicament. He could have easily gotten traps. He could have easily used spells to protect himself by ripping the heart out of a Wendigo as one. It would make perfect sense if the traps were able to stabilize these things and kill him. He was 87 when tried, so it makes me wonder if he actually had put a lot of thought to it in his early years on how to defend himself against a Wendigo. And I mean, it's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, especially when you're reading stories that occurred over 100 years ago. But then there's also the other theory, and I mentioned this prior, that perhaps maybe he was possessed by a Wendigo spirit, and that maybe these Wendigos have some sort of there's a dominance factor of evening out numbers. Maybe he was protected to kill these other ones because this other one was telling him to for specific reasons, whether it was to protect territory or to show dominance in a certain territory, and that Jack Fiddler was the pawn, and that Fiddler and his son were tried, that this woman, that the Wendigo spirit, this major hierarchy, was able to convince him that you have to make sure that she's dead too, or else. It's almost like a game of chess. I mean, those are just my two theories on how it plays out with this guy, because personally, it just sounds to me that if he was that much of a hunter, that he would get more recognition than he does, because as you said, it's a rarity to kill one of these things, and if so, you have to do it in a force that will only work by getting really close to it.
Correct. And both theories would make sense, actually. I could see both working out. Because, with a Wendigo, I would imagine since its appetite can never be satiated, that, it's going to want to kill any and all competition to make sure everything's there for it and not for others. I don't see them as pack hunters in any way. So that would make total sense.
I've always believed that Wendigos operated solely in pairs. I mean, these are cannibalistic animals, right? So, I mean, why would a cannibalistic animal form a partnership with another cannibalistic animal when they can easily rip each other apart?
Exactly. It would serve no purpose for either or.
The Jack Fiddler case is really interesting, though, and that's why I kind of wanted to touch on it, because I just found it to be so weird in a way that this one guy was tried for something that he spent an entire lifetime doing, but he happened to be affiliated with, of course, Indian belief. So it makes me wonder.
Well, the Native Americans had a way of seeing things for what they really were. A lot of other people just kind of diluted facts, whereas they stuck to the facts and they really ran with those.
Oh, yes. What do you think of, though, Ryan, when we talk about how another basis of one becoming a Wendigo over of the doing of punishment and being dishonorable for taboo activities or such as the engagement of cannibalism. So a normal native or someone kills somebody cannibalistically, eats their face or whatever. Now they're being punished by the tribe or by them or whomever, and they now become this creature. What do you hear about that theory and story?
That's used quite often. Certain video games have used the Wendigo with that same tale. Novels have used it. Even some movies, as you said, Antlers, that Wendigo movie coming up. That would just be the worst kind of punishment ever. At least for me, it would. To know I'm going to lose my humanity. Ah, man, that would just be not something I'd ever want to experience. And it'd be terrifying to actually sit there and think what you're going to become. I mean, sure, yeah, you've already committed murder, but to actually sit and think that you're going to do it again and again and again until somebody murders you, I don't know about that. That would be terrible for me. But it is a common theme, that whole cannibalism being their source for the Wendigo curse. I could see where that came about because to people of the old tribes, they must think that's the most inhuman thing ever. That only monsters and animals do that. So it just falls in line. It makes total sense.
And that's kind of a reason why, too, like, I've often had that question of, because I've had someone ask me once, well, do you believe that you can only become a Wendigo or a Skinwalker by doing something of being dishonorable? And personally, while we've seen it multiple times in pop culture, I think it can run one or two ways. What happens when the one shaman uses his powers for evil? The other tribes members will kill that one that's evil to remain the balance of the positive energy instead of the negative energy.
Right, exactly.
What do you also think about the whole idea that the Wendigo is like a red herring, or at least a not a propaganda spoof, but more along the lines of a mongerer against greed, and how its association excesses of the capitalism and colonialism of certain cultures and what we see nowadays?
Well, I could see them using it as a cautionary morale tale, and it's good that they put that out there to have that whole taboo and what to do, what not to do, what not to fall prey to. It was a great cautionary thing for the younger folk in a tribe. But if you stop and think, all of this had to stem from something else other than greed. At one point, they had to have seen something that would actually give birth to this whole tale.
I
Because greed
agree.
can only do so much. So
How far can humanity even go to even pile up a fact basis that if they are here for that purpose, then why don't we see them more often?
who's to say we don't, though? If they were seen that often so long ago, following some of the tales that we hear, are there more of them now than there were before, or is it the opposite?
Hmm, that's a good thought too. But what if
Actually,
when
I hate to mention this right now, but look at what people are doing modern day right now as of this moment. Look how strong greed is. It makes you wonder how common are Wendigo now?
which makes me wonder, can a Wendigo be a human being?
Absolutely. Some of the tales actually say they start out as human beings.
It's weird because when you mention today's standards, what's going on, I also think of the time too when we talk about how people can run into an ordinary person every day, and this one person has some sort of weirdness to them, some sort of creepy vibe. And
Right.
their complexion is dark, their mind, their energy is very negative, and when you run into somebody of that nature, could that be in fact a Wendigo or something of that thought that is there and it's evil? But if it's looking at you and observing you, that's a
Mhm.
scarier thought.
That's a terrifying thought, and it very well could be. Influence and manipulation are so powerful.
Mm.
Never underestimate those two things.
Where do we normally get encounters of Wendigos? Normally, Ryan, are we looking up in upper northwestern part of the U.S. into the Canadian border, or are we looking somewhere more northern of the U.S.?
A lot of them originate in Canada, but they are disturbingly moving more and more into the States.
Hmm.
You hear more confessions and details of people running into these things in, like Oklahoma or even California. I've heard a couple of stories from there.
I think it's interesting to make note that these Wendigo creatures can be seen anywhere too. So let me ask this though: when they're sighted, right?
Right?
How does one go about it? Like what is the normal precautions? Do you think? Like what do you think about what would be the normal rationale when seeing one? You go first. I'll tell you mine, and we'll see what we got afterwards.
You know, if I were to encounter a Wendigo, my first thought would be get it as far away as possible,
Hmm.
and don't let that thing see you. Certainly, don't let it start tracking you or flanking you. You know, because this isn't something you want to run into.
No.
You know, you don't want to walk up to it and start wondering what it is and observe it for any length of time, because the longer you're there, the chances are higher it's going to see you. So I would just get out of there as fast as possible and just pray with all my power that it doesn't follow me home.
I
Because
agree.
once it picks you out as prey, it's pretty much game over for you. You're not going to be able to do much.
And see, I have the same opinion because I feel that if to run into one, you really have to also take into thought process that you're in the woods, if you're unarmed especially, with something that can kill you. You need to have a basic strategy. If this thing wants to kill you, it's going to come up to you and kill you. You won't even have enough time to run and get out of there at time to build a fast distance and speed for the time being because it'll just kill you. And you really got to go ahead. If it lets you go, you got to be very cautious on what you do. I would personally feel that you'd have to really take a look at your surroundings and sage and protect yourself. This is a spiritual creature, and one of which that is of negative harm, one that will kill you, I think.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. It's not something that you want to risk anything with. You don't want to try to go back and look for it or try to take any photos. Just, use your discretion and get out of there. Because, chances are if it's letting you see it, it's probably already seen you.
Hmm. What do you think of the Algonquian legend when it describes the creature as is, a giant with a heart of ice? Sometimes it is the thought to be entirely made of ice. Its body is skeletal and deformed with missing lips and toes. What do you think of that quote?
That is horrendous. That reminds me of a ghoul in a way, almost a zombie-like creature. But oh god, I would not want to see this. The funny thing is, if you actually look at modern day descriptions of the Wendigo, a lot of them have the stag-headed figure. Where it's wearing the deer's head that has the antlers, and really, that's not from the original legend.
No. And it makes me wonder where that even comes from, if that's probably a fanfic or if it's just like a.
I think that actually started getting popular around the time that the Wendigo movie was released in the early '90s. I'm not sure if you've seen that one.
Oh, no, 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 no. Yeah, I have not.
It
It's.
was an interesting movie. It wasn't actually really based on the cryptid, so to speak. It was more a psychological thriller, and the Wendigo is just kind of used as a figurehead for it. But
Interesting.
that's when they started depicting the stag-headed monster with the stick figures all around it, kind of like the Blair Witch style stick figures, the stickmen.
And that's kind of an interesting type basis too, because when you look at the Wendigo, and I think that's one of the most notorious images of the deer-headed skull and the antlers and the deformed body. And I think they take inspiration from the Algonquian legend, but they also mix it up with their own 2 cents. They take one of the most notorious animals in nature and just demonize it. They demonize it with it, making something totally abnormal and just terrifying.
Right. It adds to it. It makes it all the more terrifying than it already is. Not that you
Mm.
had to add much when you read the stories.
Now, I apologize, folks, if I pronounce this tribe wrong. The Ojibwa describe a large creature as tall as a tree with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was a strange hiss, its footprints full of blood, and it ate any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory. And those that were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual became the Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh. It's almost like a nursery rhyme in a way, but
Almost reminds you of the stories of the werewolves as well.
very much so. And it might make me wonder in comparison to the two, because really, I mean, when you look at Wendigo, we look at something that is created through the ounce of spiritualism. When you look at werewolf, it's created through the ounce of spiritualism in a way too, if you think about it. But
Yeah.
Wendigo, though, its origin basis story, though, I mean, you hear a case like that, I feel that the Ojibwa is more notorious and more ventured with, I think, a great description, only because it talks about what we've basically talked about in the last half hour, which is simply discussing how these things are just so mandible. They can possess somebody. I believe they can. They have that ability. I
Oh,
also
absolutely.
believe that they can easily become anything they want to be and kill whatever they want. They want to kill a dog in the backyard of a house, they will do that. If they want to kill a human being, not to sound vague, but if it were to in fact be unfortunately a child, they would do that because that is what they are. They are killing machines.
That they are, yes. And the voice mimicry they have and the ability to play mind games with you, that shows a very, very high intelligence. One that Dogman and Sasquatch don't readily possess.
Oh yes. What do you think though about when natives talk about it, how close it hits the home and how they just there are many times where some natives refuse to talk about them.
I think that's with good reason. They're afraid that even talking about these things will bring them about, and there has to be something to that mythology as well. When they're saying how, yeah, even saying their name can be a curse or bringing them up in public can be a curse, you have to believe that. There's some things you can question, but that's probably one thing you should not question because that comes from experience, I'm sure.
Mm. And I
I'm sure this.
recall. What were you going to say, Ryan? I'm sorry.
I think this is something they've lived through, that they've actually spoken about them, and these things have come into existence. It kind of goes along the ways of the manifestation, where if you believe in something so much and you talk about it so much, in a way, you give that thing life, and it comes about, and before you know it, that very thing is hunting you.
And that's another thing too. I think a lot of people, when they research or look up the thing about it, like I know that there are some people out there who know of certain tribes and know of certain Native Americans, but I feel that there's just so much intensity, when it comes to talking about these things. There's some sort of world order in a way, where if you talk about it, you're going to face a consequence. That they don't want to talk about it because there's a fear it might come out and it might attack them, their tribe, their family. And it's almost like that typical scenario where you're talking about Bigfoot or Dogman, and you talk about the damn Bigfoot or the Sasquatch or the Dogman, and the next thing you know, the Dogman's sitting on your front lawn later that night.
I would
It's
hope.
it's that scary game of hide and seek. But like I always tell people, you got to go into these things with precaution sometimes.
Well, of course, it's always better to be safe than sorry.
Oh yes, better safe than sorry. Even though that's been used multiple times before other contents provided it, I just want to make that perfectly clear. Native Americans also spoken with their versions of it about a creature that's been a gigantic spirit over 15 feet tall that had once been human, but transformed into a creature by magic. What do you think about the heights? Is the heights exaggerated, or do you think it's on point?
I should think they're exaggerated. I mean, for some living being to actually grow to that height, it just doesn't seem possible. I mean, maybe they seem so large because everybody's so afraid of them, but I don't think they would actually grow to literally be that tall. No. Because how could they hide at that height? Really, they're going to be so visible at 15 feet tall.
And that even in comparison, you got a guy that's hunting and he's in a tree stump, and you could see this thing come from the
Mm,
wood line, and you can clearly see him. Obviously, I think from a far distance,
I would think so.
but I often find that in many ways that these things are so tall that you can easily rip them apart any given shape. There's some sort of characteristic to them that they can literally can look at them and they can do whatever they want and how tall they could be. They can outmatch you.
So me,
Nonetheless, you hear the descriptions of these things. Ryan, how many descriptions have you heard of the Wendigo?
oh, quite a few. I've heard where they're just, they're faceless creatures that just all you can see is their teeth and their mouths, and that's it. I've heard the stag-headed description. I've heard the more Sasquatch-like description, the more werewolf-like description, the spiritual description. It's just the list goes on and on.
What do you are there several different types of Wendigo? I may have asked you this, but to put it in a different perspective, like we've heard about the deer type, right? The one where we've heard about it and seen multiple pop cultures, but are there different variations, or does it blend because each one is different?
I think it blends because each one is different, and everybody's kind of picking what they like from the legend and just adding to it a bit more. Eventually, that's what happens with mythology. It gets kind of diluted as it
Mm,
goes down the line.
I
Yeah,
think
that's why it remains mythology. It's not really factual anymore. As more people add to the stories, the facts are pushed out in favor of more detail.
Mm. Now, one other thing that truly fascinates me is something that was apparently written in 1661 by Jesuit relations. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
I don't believe I am.
I'm going to read this, and I want to hear what other people think too about this. What caused us greater concern was the intelligence that met us upon entering the lake. They're talking about the lake in Canada, the Great Lake. Namely, the men that departed by our conductor for the purpose of summoning the nations of the North Sea, and assigning them a rendezvous, where they were to await our coming, had met their death the previous winter in a very strange manner. Those poor men were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all of these species of disease, which affects their imaginations and causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh, that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men like veritable werewolves, and devour them ferociously, without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more greedily the more they eat. This alignment attacked our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among those simple people for checking such acts of murder, they were slain in order to stay the course of their madness.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, this, of course, doesn't specifically say when to go, right? Because we don't know. It actually sounds more like it's an actual case of dogman attacks. But one of the things that strikes me is the fact that the people that were apparently killed, or at least in this case, the people who did the killing, they had this taste for flesh. Did they transform into werewolves? No, it doesn't specifically say that. It only just says that they have the appetite and the desirely hunger for like that of werewolves. You gotta remember too, this is 1661. This is when Europe was heavy with werewolf reports. So that was the closest comparison, if you think about it. So,
It's a good analogy, a very good analogy.
so you have a case here where if this, I think it was a Wendigo attack. I feel that these were Wendigos killing these people. It was just a
Does
very interesting thing. Very interesting thing. Let me ask you this, Ryan. Have you collected some reports of Wendigos?
I have a few, not too many, but I'm not surprised because that's not really common in my area. So as far as reports go, I'll get a few now and again. But I think in some cases it might be mistaken identities. A lot of people see videos on YouTube and whatnot describing a Wendigo, and they think, okay, everything that has white skin or whatever might be a Wendigo, and I just don't think that's the case.
I think so too. I mean, looking up a few reports of reported instances where people have seen these Wendigo-like creatures, I think it's tough to say greater good because really, I mean, it could be a Wendigo, it could not be a Wendigo, but looking through a few of these cases, looking at them, there was a case in 1878 when a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta named the Swift Runner. We talked about this. Swift Runner, the trader of the Hudson Bays Company, was married and the father of 6 children, and in 1875 he served as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. The Swift Runner case we've already discussed. My dearest apologies to those folks that kind of sidetracked us a little bit. I'm just looking at some of my notes, and I had forgotten about Swift Runner. But yeah, we talked about how Swift Runner and his family were starving along the numerous of the Cree families, and his eldest son was the first to die of the starvation, and that Swift Runner had succumbed to the Wendigo psychosis. So, I think that's probably one of the most interesting cases, though, with Swift Runner.
Oh, very much so. The details of that crime too are rather horrid.
Oh, exactly.
Know that every member of his family except for him perished, and that the bones were cracked open, the marrow was sucked out. He was boiling human fat. He had hung his baby from the tree,
And that is
which
a
why
very scary scene.
very much so.
I don't want to get too defrained from language, but that's a lot of balls right there. I mean, to be under that psychosis and to really just go ahead and have you do such a thing like Ed Gein, I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
that's insane. And I mean that's one of the reasons why when we talk about these subjects. Now, the thing with me folks is I don't want to sound like I'm stupid when talking about these things. I don't want to come off like I'm an idiot in the way I respond to it. It's because the thought of it is just so disturbing that that's my reaction towards it. I mean, if I think that's like holy shit, that's scary as hell from a dogman case. Like, dude, I'd be scared shitless. My reaction is because it's a scary case to think about. I mean,
You're sane. Of course, it doesn't sound right to you. We're all sane here, so we're not going to think that sounds normal.
that's like when someone sees a car accident, they're just not thinking about it at first, and then the shock comes in until afterwards, like, holy shit, did I just see that car collide with that semi? Like, and then the blood's all over the place. Like, that's kind of how it goes, I think. It's freaky. There's a lot of Wendigo reported sightings, though, nowadays, even, and especially in northern Ontario, Canada, the cave of the Wendigo near the town of Kenora. Are you familiarized with Kenora, the cave system in that area?
A little bit, yeah. I've heard some stories from that area.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because there's a lot of cases out there where people have said that this cave system, apparently they've heard screams, they've seen red eye shine. Often people have been chased out of the area, and they've heard and a menacing scratching sound, foul odors because of what's going on in this cave system in Kenora. And apparently the Kenora police don't know anything about it.
Oh, of course not, conveniently.
Now, the Kenora cave system has allegedly been spotted by the traders and trackers and trappers for many decades, and they believe that the Wendigo roams these woodlands and the prairies of the northern Minnesota and Canada, Kenora, Ontario Canadian border. And many of these other places have given them the Wendigo capital because of the sightings there. Now, besides talk about sightings, let's talk about how this is a good area, a good hotspot for sightings. I mean, first of all, Ontario, Canada, first of all Canadian area, all this we talked about, like Minnesota and Kenora and Ontario, Canada, these are very hot spots for woods. There's enough sanctuary for these creatures like Bigfoots and Dogmen to live. And it's easy for one, under the possession of one, to do such things in these woods. It's easy.
Absolutely. There's such a vast stretch of wilderness out there. You could just keep running and running and running and hiding for weeks on end and never be found. If you've ever been up there, you know what I'm talking about here, that, there's so much territory to cover that anything could hide there at any given time.
It really makes you wonder, like, what's the whole principle being that it's very easy for these things to live in harmony somewhere, and you wouldn't even notice it or know a thing about it.
Well, I think if they've got enough food to hold them or whatever, then maybe they won't bother humanity. But, I think there's more going on than people think.
Mm.
I don't think they live in total harmony. I just don't think Wendigo can do that. I think they just kind of mind their own business until food runs scarce, and then they're looking for more.
What do you think of the weaknesses applied to Wendigo? Could there be a weakness?
I've heard that fire is one of their weaknesses. You'll often hear people say, kill it with fire, and that's not really a joke when it comes to Wendigo.
Fire, does it symbolize because of how hot it is, or is it because of how fire is seen as a dangerous tactic for anything? It can do harm in many ways. Are they afraid, or is it because of the spiritualism of what they practice that fire is seen as an enemy?
I think it's because of the cleansing nature of fire, because, with fire, it purges things.
Right.
I think when you use fire against a demonic spirit like the Wendigo, it's thought of as like cleansing that spirit and getting rid of it and just exiling it permanently.
And that makes sense. It would make perfect sense for in such case to do such a format, I think, in a way of Wendigos and as a weakness. Because if fire can purge and destroy, and Wendigo can burn and can purge and destroy, what would one do if one were to combine and come in contact with one another and it destroys the other? The fire would win. The fire can be destroyed by water, but
Mm-hmm.
can the Wendigo magically perform water on itself in order to stop such a hazard? It would have to go by the nearest lake if it's in the woods.
I would think you'd have to trap one to make sure it didn't run into any water. I don't think they can form it themselves because I don't think they can control
Hmm.
nature. But no, I don't think they could actually just summon a rainstorm or summon water out of nowhere.
Right.
Right. I'm sure they are incredibly tough to kill, though. I'm sure nailing it down with fire is incredibly hard to do. I wouldn't want to be the one that has to do it.
What do you think of these cases sometimes when you hear somebody going out and wanting to kill one and they're going to use spears? Is that just an old urban legend that spears as knives or weaknesses, that these things can be pierced by anything?
I think that is just misconception. They've been reading too many novels or watching too many movies. I don't think you can just pick up a spear, go find one, and start poking at it and hope to kill them.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a foolish idea. I will not encourage anybody to do that with any cryptid, really, especially the Wendigo.
It's a
It's
very
just
dumb decision, if you ask me.
you have to know what you're doing. It's pretty much like anything else in life. You have to study, research, and absorb knowledge before you can go out there and do something like that.
It's still a very interesting topic to talk about with hell, no less, but still one of the which that is just truly one of which unbelievable to kind of just put into one play.
Right.
And one other thing I want to make perfectly clear, I don't want to get sidetracked, but when we talk about the case of Jack Fiddler, I forgot to mention that Fiddler's own brother was killed by a Wendigo after turning into a Wendigo, actually.
Oh, so it's kind of like a vendetta thing for this guy.
But he only turned when the food ran out of trade, when they were all out of food during the trading expedition. Um, Fiddler was basically like the walking Indian Terminator.
Right.
I hate to really go back to him for a second because it was so early on in the show, but even just thinking about it now, with Fiddler, his whole basis was a Terminator-like stance. He was basically sent to every tribe to kill someone who was about to turn into a Wendigo or was a Wendigo. So when we talk about like having some sort of special spiritual bond of positivity put on people when they're seeing Wendigos, I believe it, even if
Yeah.
it's a Native American blood, because of just how one can defend itself. If one can defend itself with powers, then I'd be curious to follow its belief and go out there into the woods with other cryptids.
I
But
would agree with.
that is also a very ballsy thing to say, but it also comes in terms of supernatural like creatures. But I just wanted to
Mhm.
make that one little comment because I completely forgot about that when I was looking at my notes. I completely forgot because Jack Fiddler is a very interesting case when it comes to Wendigos. I just want to do more on him. I feel he just is a very interesting figure. I'd love to do some more research on. But besides Mr. Fiddler, Ryan, we've already covered all the basics of Wendigo, but what about the white Sasquatch Wendigo? There's some interesting detail about that one of which could be find rather controversial, but I'd love to hear more.
Okay, yeah, the Wendigo, when applied to the Sasquatch variant, it actually means either cannibal giant or cannibal spirit. Now, these things are described as the vicious of the vicious, the savage of the savage. They're huge, they're tall, 13, 14, 15 feet tall. Sometimes they have the white fur, sometimes they have the black fur, but they are said to actually purposely and knowingly stalk humans with the sole intention of eating them alive. They're not like your patty type that'll be elusive and try to run away from you. No, these things are going to run at you and try to take you down when they can. And they've been seen in Canada. And for the longest time, they thought that's where they stayed. But more and more of the reports are trickling down to the States as well.
Do you think that is the Genisqua, or is that a totally different, as I said, a Wendigo like Bigfoot?
I think it could very well be the Genosqua. It's possible. Though I've never heard any reports of them wearing the applique stone armor. It could just be a modern day version of them, yes.
But you would think that as of right now that these Sasquatches that are like cannibalistic white giants are a separate Wendigo-like creature from a Genisqua.
It's possible. They could be, because, if you look at the descriptions, while they're similar in many ways, there's that great exaggerating difference because they're white. Nobody ever said that Janoskwa had the white fur.
Hmm.
So when you add the white fur, which could be a form of albinism amongst that species, it makes you wonder if it is a completely different species or if it's a branch off from the Genosqua.
Right. What do you think of the Genosqua as a whole when you hear reports and stories that they are an animal that is not the Genosqua, but like the Wendigo? Like when you hear the reports of Wendigo and Sasquatch, when you look at it from that perspective of them being that cannibalistic white giant, do you think that they could be easily responsible for a lot of the mysterious on and off disappearances of people in the upper northern regions in the 80s and 90s during the times of Ontario, especially in the Canadian region? Do you think that there is a huge link that these were Wendigo-like attacks than regular Bigfoot Dogman-like attacks?
I think there could be. The lack of any physical evidence kind of shows that maybe the bodies were consumed,
Right.
which would fall more in line with the Wendigo behavior. It's going to take that prey and it's just going to take it wherever it can go, and it's going to feast on every part of the body. It's not going to leave anything to be found at all. And we do find shoes sometimes where we find articles of clothing that are torn up and maybe even sometimes like neatly folded, and neatly folded doesn't make sense to me. But when we find articles of clothing where they're all torn up, it does actually make sense because they're tearing apart their prey.
Mm-hmm. I agree with
So
that.
I do think that type could be behind a lot of the disappearances and the vanishings. I do think that, which kind of makes you wonder, just how safe are you out there, and what are we not doing correctly when we're trying to stay safe?
What do you think of the cases where people have, like, let's just take a look into the thickness of darkness here and talk LBL for a second. Now, we've had our opinions on LBL, but let's talk about it also too with what we're discussing Wendigo. Could have been a Wendigo responsible? Could there be a Wendigo in LBL right now? That
It's fascinating you brought that up because one of our subs are amazing, by the way, because you learn things. He actually commented that the case of LBL was originally a Sasquatch report, but the guy was pressured by Sasquatch community members to alter it to be a Dogman story.
really.
So going back to the original source of that story, I do believe it could have been one of these types that did it.
Hmm.
When you look up at the details too, how one of the bodies was found up in a tree.
Right.
That kind of seems like a territorial marking of something throwing the remnant of its prey up there to show everybody else that's coming in there that this is my turf. These are my kills. Stay out of here.
Right. That makes me wonder too. Then, if that's the case, then could a Wendigo have been responsible for those killings and even the killings prior years before? And perhaps could a Wendigo be responsible for roaming LBL right now?
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. I would definitely say there is a Wendigo there. And it's very interesting to think about, but in a way it's completely terrifying to think about because I do want to go there do some investigations, but I don't want to run into a Wendigo.
I agree. I don't think anybody does, especially because of the subject matter. You're dealing with something that's just terrifying.
If anybody's brave enough to tackle a Wendigo and you want to come with me and be the Wendigo fighter, hey, sign up. Let me know.
I'll tell you one thing though. These creatures do possess a very freaky characteristic that I personally cannot explain, and it does make me wonder. It truly does, because I don't even to this day, just talking about it, there's just so much to know about, so much to learn about. It's just truly something try to get a basic learning of.
It's hard to grasp, it really is.
But what were you gonna say, Rye?
It's not something that we can just, go out there, look for, and say, hey, there's one to study. It's not like that for us. We do have to rely on these older tales. And even then, they only tell us so much. They're not going to tell us everything.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of how I've also seen it as well. That also makes me want to go ahead and discuss something too is, Ryan, we talk about Wendigo, but I don't think we also kind of put together our own patch notes on what we think a Wendigo is, and I think it'd be great to kind of give our own opinions on what Wendigo is. What do you think a Wendigo is? What do you think as it is as whole from what the information we've looked up? But what do you think it personally is?
Personally, of my opinion, I have the theory that there's two different types that we're dealing with here. You have the flesh and blood variety, a man or a woman that sadly fell prey to this psychosis. and maybe even a possession of sorts. And then you have the purely spiritual type, which is just the kind you don't want to mess with by any means. It's the more demonic kind of entity that's presenting itself. It's doing what it has to do, and then it goes into hiding again. And it's just that is completely wow, not something I'd ever want to encounter. But I do think there's two types, maybe even three. Maybe we could go back to the whole Sasquatch thing, where yeah, there's the Sasquatch type, the spiritual type, and then you have the unfortunate man or woman.
I have to agree, and it's crazy because I think of that in the same route because I am a flesh and blood believer. I believe that we're dealing with flesh and blood animals, and when we look at the psychosis type, I mean, people who get evaluated for it, the test results come back of a major psychosis, one of which they cannot explain, physicians can't explain. They get put on all these medications that just endulce their psychosis even more, and to be under that possession. Yeah, I believe it. I believe that there is a way, somebody who can do that. I can also believe that there are people who think that they are these flesh-eating killers. Like they wear the wolf skin or something like that, and it's like, they are Wendigo. There was a case, not to get silly, but there was a case in 2012 involving a guy that was on bath salts, and he ate apart this homeless guy's face. And
Oh, Florida, yeah.
some people said that it was the result of the drugs, but at the same time, you also had people coming out saying that that could be a skinwalker or a Wendigo possession because of the facts that this dude was heavily on drugs, took a lot of bullets, and still lived. And
It make you wonder. It really does, because like I said earlier, you have to wonder why there aren't that many seen nowadays. I do believe there are more seen than people like to acknowledge.
yes, and I agree with that. I do. It's just truly, it stands out to me, I guess, because of just how frightening the subject matter is behind it and the tribes that they've discussed it. But I also have to say, too, that in the event of it being a spiritual like animal, you are dealing with something that is cannibalistic, something that is forcefully, heavily aggressive. And we don't know what we're dealing with. Because we know we know what we're reading, but we don't know exactly how to deal with it because
Right.
of its nature. You have to be a part of the tribes that know of it in the spiritual sense that can help disarm it. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's like I've always said. There's a great deal to be learned from those people.
Yes, and I
You know,
agree. I agree
if they want
100%.
to deal with something, then take it as gospel. When they say don't do this, don't do it.
I
Or if they
agree.
say do this, then do it. Follow their orders.
That's how we learn, right?
Exactly.
Well, folks, before we get going with tonight's show, Ryan, I want to thank you again, as always, for being a fantastic co host and giving your own 2 cents on the subject matter of tonight's show and in general every other show. I think it's fantastic, man. Venomous Fringe, how we are right now. We've got so many people who followed us and have been following our stuff, and look how amazing it's come out.
Oh, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be here, man. I love our subs. They're a great lot of people. And yeah, time with you, man. It's always great to discuss cryptids and
Oh, it is.
ideas off each other, and yeah, let's see what kind of theories we can formulate. It's always fun. It's always a good time.
And that also wants me to get into a few closing notes this evening because I wanted to keep all my notes closed up until the conclusion of tonight's broadcast. Folks, I want to remind everybody right now, the Venomous Fringe, what we do here, we are researchers. We go by science of investigating of creatures. We're not here to throw biblical thoughts in your face. We're not here to give you a dialect on if something is evil or demonic because of what one might say or what one encounter might pull out of exaggeration. My whole concept here is that we are giving our own approach to it in a scientific perspective, and that's what we are here at the VF. Surely, we do have our own opinions on certain subjects, whether it's demons or something even far more spiritual. But we do keep it to a minimal and a professional type strain for the subject matter, which also leads me to one other discussion. I'm very well aware that there are often times where people are not going to be fans of us, and a few of them are people who happen to be people we know. And folks, I want to make this perfectly clear. You can follow whatever following path you choose to follow, but at the end of the day, you are either here to watch what we throw out that is informative to you, or you're a sheep and you follow in the footsteps of what one might say because that's what they say because they're notorious for one or two things. Folks, we're here at the Fringe to do, and that's to give out the information, and that's our whole purpose. That's Ryan's purpose, that's my purpose, and if you happen to think any different of us because of what one person might say or jab at, if you have that question, always feel free to ask us, because we are open to give out the honest answers. But not that that matters. We're not about conflicts or tensions, but we just want to make that perfectly clear to the brand of what this show is. And then on top of that, folks, fellow Fringeaholics, Ryan and I were talking about this too with the coronavirus, but Ryan, you had mentioned something about some sort of charitable causes, or something that were to help out people with the corona or COVID-19 as a general.
Oh yeah, I'd love to do a donation drive for not only the elderly people around us, but the workers that are still going out there and doing their jobs for us, the medical workers, the restaurant workers. They're going to need some financial support somehow. And if you can't give any money, then by all means, just pick up the phone and call somebody. If you know someone that's older than you and they're alone, call them. Let them know, hey, you're not alone in this. I'm here for you. And do the same. If you see a medical worker, stop him or her and thank them for what they're doing.
If you can thank the troops for serving the country, you can definitely stop and help a senior citizen or an on-duty officer, fire, paramedic, or cop, that they're doing their jobs. This is a very heavy situation, and I know that there are a few subscribers who are cops and firefighters, and they do deserve and need the help they need in this desperate time. So yeah, folks, thank you all for tuning in for tonight's edition of the Venomous Fringe. I'm very excited that we did this episode. It's been a long awaiting. Ladies and gentlemen, if you guys would like to send us an email, you can reach us at thevenomousfringe@gmail.com. I'll leave a link down below in the description. Folks, we really are engaging now on social media. We really would like you guys to help us out. If you guys would like to follow us, feel free to follow me or Ryan. Our Twitter links are down below. If you guys would like to go ahead and just have a follow, you can follow us for updates, follow us for just randomness, want to see our personal lives, whatever you guys want to do. We'd love to have you guys aboard our trains as well if you guys enjoy and support the show. And if you guys want to be a part of a Facebook group, we have a Facebook link down below. We'd love you guys to be a part of this Facebook group. It's the Venomous Fringe official Cryptids and Paranormal group. Love to have you guys aboard. And then also, last but not least, if you guys would like to help support the show, you guys feel free to donate. I know that sounds ridiculous and ludicrous, right, what's going on right now, but if you guys would like to help support the show as a free donation, feel free to, guys, to leave a link down below. There'll be a PayPal. Also, too, me and Ryan are currently working on some designs because we're going to be launching down the road. Everybody's been asking for it, but folks, we've listened to you. We're going to be launching pretty soon the merchandise brand of the Venomous Fringe. And me and Ryan got plenty of ideas loaded up. Ain't that right, Ryan?
Oh yes, we got plenty of them coming down the bike. You guys are going to like them. Just stay tuned, you'll see.
With all that being said, folks, my name is Chris Fringe, and I'm joined alongside my co-host Ryan Tremblay. And you guys have a fantastic evening. You take care.